This panel, which is a very active panel, is going to give you some highlights of how the summit has responded to some of the challenges that you have heard discussed here. There's a lot of coming and going, but just hang with us. We're hoping we can do it really promptly. And I'm going to turn over the podium at the moment to my Canadian colleague, Brett Kubicek.
Thank you very much, Laura. Hello, everyone. Laura's kindly given me an opportunity to talk a little bit about sort of how we've responded in Canada and why hopefully a lot of you will have a chance to meet some of the amazing researchers and practitioners and frontline workers who are here today with us from Canada and why we've been here since day one. So my name is Brett Kubicek. I lead on research and knowledge mobilization for an organization in the Government of Canada called the Canada Centre for Community Engagement and Prevention of Violence, Canada Centre for short. We're housed at Public Safety, and we're aiming to try and lead the federal government's efforts to prevent and counter violent extremism. And that's all forms of violent extremism, most of which are certainly hate motivated. While we aim to complement the work of our colleagues in the criminal justice sector, law enforcement, and national security, our role is to really sort of put the emphasis on prevention. And when we say that word, we're inspired by, draw lessons from fields like social work, clinical health, efforts to counter gender-based violence, other forms of hate. And you'll often hear organizations like ours say how we're informed and guided by public health approaches. We're trying to think about what do we need to do to work with the population at large to build protective capacities. What do we do when a population's been exposed to harmful influences? What do we do when somebody's acquired the problem in question? Public health also reminds us that we need lots of research and evidence to see what's working. It also reminds us to be careful that when we intervene, we don't cause more harm. But as a field, it also reminds us that we're still quite young as a field of violence prevention and harm reduction. And one of the challenges for the field that's been true in a number of countries for many years is that those out on the front lines doing the hard work are often doing so in isolation or in relative isolation. And so one of the roles for an organization like ours is to try and find them, support them, and help connect them with others. That's true domestically. One of the very first things we did when we started in 2016-17 was to invest in the Canadian Practitioners Network for the Prevention of Radicalization and Extremist Violence to help domestic actors connect with each other. But we've also had very early on tried to help them connect and learn from counterparts abroad. And often we did that in close partnership with our colleagues in the US government. So a few years ago, I got a call from one of them, a guy named Dr. John Piccarelli, who is now on the National Security Council. He said, you're going to get a call from someone named Laura Ellison about something called the Eradicate Hate Global Summit, and I think you need to take her call. And when, of course, typically not a good idea to say no to John, and then also learn very quickly you don't want to say no to Laura, in part because of the work that she and the Eradicate Hate team have done to help address this issue of helping make those connections. So we very quickly saw the potential and encouraged all these remarkable frontline Canadian organizations to take part. So you'll see here people working on early prevention, like Civics, who work on digital literacy, like Digital Public Square, who are aiming to address toxic mis and disinformation online, programs like John Howard Society of Ottawa, Yorktown Family Services, and the Organization for the Prevention of Violence, who are working with complex cases to steer them away from violence. And this year we also have the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, Peel Regional Police, and Toronto Metropolitan University, who are really trying to address frontline needs for training, support for police and communities to address hate crime. We're really trying to build more of a North American community of practice, and I think a good indication of the success is an organization who's also here, White Ribbon, who are still pretty new to us. They work to address gender-based violence by working with men and boys. And one of their main sort of drivers for them was the École Polytechnique massacre in 1989, where 14 women in Montreal were gunned down, all engineering students, in an act of anti-feminist, violent misogynist, violent extremism. They attended last year and said they've never seen an event like this where they had the opportunity to meet so many different sectors. And that's kind of why we're here. That's why we asked Laura to help us. Our first sort of post-pandemic event we held in May in Ottawa, about 16 different countries represented, over 300. So many of the participants said one of the most powerful sessions at the conference was one that Laura and Eradicate Hate set up to bring together voices and perspectives of victims and survivors. And it's something that we have some participants now in that working group here, and we want to continue that work. Last thing I'll say, Laura, and then I'll hand it off, is that you want us to talk about concrete results. Recently, DHS, our colleagues, announced they were funding a partnership that builds on a conversation that happened here between Yorktown Family Services, Organization for the Prevention of Violence, Boston Children's Hospital, the University of Illinois College of Medicine, to test and develop measures for showing how reintegration efforts are working, like how their efforts to steer people away from violence and reintegrate them into more general society are working, to develop tools for measurement. And that came out of conversations that happened here. I promised Laura I would do a cheeky transition to the next panel. Those of you who may be Liverpool supporters, and I may be one of them, may be familiar with a certain concept of not walking alone. This conference has been such a help for us and our practitioners to find more connections. And so it's my pleasure to introduce the sports panel.
So thank you very much, and I almost feel like saying a warm welcome to Pittsburgh because I feel so part of the Pittsburgh community now. This is my third year coming here, and the first time when I came here for the first Global Summit, and I was sitting back there in the corner and observing everything and taking notes, and taking with me the very strong sense of urgency that was in this room then, continues to be. The first summit, we didn't even have lunch breaks. We would go get our food and come back and keep talking, keep listening, keep unpacking what hate means and what can be done about it. And I remember by the second day, Laura had lost her voice, and people were talking to each other. The urgency was so real that you could really feel that something was happening here. I met several members of the Pittsburgh community, those who had survived and also those who had come in to support them when this tragedy happened at the Tree of Life Synagogue. And I have a mandate from the United Nations as Under Secretary General and Special Advisor to the Secretary General on the Prevention of Genocide. And my mandate is to provide early warning. So everything that happens in this room, including today, is extremely useful to the work that I do. And it's unfortunate that communities to whom genocides have happened in the past, like for example, the Holocaust, the Tutsi in Rwanda, the Bosniaks in Srebrenica, that the likelihood of that happening again is always very high. So, so we pay so much attention. So then we had a conversation with Laura, and I was thinking, in addition to working on prevention of genocide, I also have the mandate of working on countering and addressing hate speech globally within the United Nations. And I was thinking in terms of how do we address this? We address hate speech as a UN from the perspective of ensuring that we conform with the freedom of expression. But at the same time, it's difficult to speak about hate speech. Most people say, oh, you are crossing a line, you know, there's hate speech and then there's freedom of expression. So I was really thinking, what is it that we could take away from here? And when I went back to the Secretary General, I went back with that sense of urgency and saying, there's something that's happening in Pittsburgh. There's something so great that's happening in Pittsburgh. This idea of a community coming together to be remembered for the way they responded to a crisis and not what happened to them and how they've all come together, and they need our 100% support. But I wasn't clear among all these ideas that I took away from here, like what we needed to do. And then there was another attack. I remember reaching out to Laura. I sent her an email and said, Laura, I'm seeing on the news that there's another attack on another synagogue. Is there anything that we need to do? And then we got back into that conversation again. And then I told her, Laura, you know, when the first conference was held during the COVID pandemic, as she said earlier, and there were not many people here, not many people in the airport. There were lots of people in this room, but not many people in the airport. And so my colleague and I, when we were leaving, we walked round and round the airport, just walking around, and I was struck by how many photos of sports people are on the walls of the airport in Pittsburgh. I had never seen anything like that before. There were even statues. There was a statue, and I didn't know who these people are. I was very struck, and I told Laura, I think I got the impression that you people in Pittsburgh love your sports. Like, could we do something with sports? And she told me, yes, you know, this is the home of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And then she was asking me, do you know the Pittsburgh Steelers? And I told her, well, I've worked for the UN for the last, at that time it was like about a year. I said, and I've been working in Africa, who are those? And so my son stepped in and really explained to me. And then Laura told me, you know, I know the perfect person who can work on you with this. And her name is Michelle Rosenthal, because she's been working with the Pittsburgh Steelers for a long time, and she knows like how to organize the sports community. And she asked me, do you know Michelle? And I said, yes, because Michelle had spoken here on this stage about how her two brothers had been killed. And when I saw her two brothers, the photo of her two brothers, it struck me that there was absolutely no way they were of any danger to the shooter. Like, there was no way. So when she finished speaking, I followed her outside and I said, Michelle, can I give you a hug? And give her a hug. We never spoke. I came back. So then Laura connected us. And then Michelle is a force of nature. Within no time, she began mobilizing all these sports groups, like around the US. And then we had a meeting at the UN, and they came, and we were sitting at the table and thinking, wow, this idea is really moving fast. And then after that, then we started mobilizing ourselves in terms of what is it that we need to get to do the connection between the UN and the Eradicate Hate Sports Working Group. And so we ended up working on a plan of action. And then this plan of action became this game plan. We call it the game plan. And it was launched on December 9th of last year by the Secretary General and the President of the General Assembly and ourselves as a sports working group. So we were all at the United Nations. It became totally global. We had statements that came from all the groups, the Asia group, the Africa group, the Latin America group, all of them in support of this game plan. So we had the world, we now have the world behind us. And after that, then, you know, we've had all these meetings and become very close as the sports working group. We have like more than 22 leagues sitting the NHL, the NBA, like NASCAR, like then Rishi, who will speak about the Liverpool Football Club. And so it's been such a journey. We went to Liverpool. We also went to Boston, invited by the Red Sox. For the first time, I entered a stadium, and there I was. So it's been such a journey, but we haven't lost track of why we exist. Think about sports. Think about the love that people have for sports. When we study, because we study a great deal, the manifestos of people who go out to shoot others, what they say, in addition to saying who they hate, they have all these lists of who they hate and what they're planning to do about it. They also talk about the football club or the sports club that they follow. And many people are sitting out there with lots of information coming at them, and nothing to counter this kind of information that's coming at them of the people whom they should hate. And the sports clubs and sports leagues and, and managers and coaches and athletes, they are role models. They stand in front of people and everybody listens, whatever they are saying. And sports, it's clearly from all the work that we do globally, all over the world, everywhere I've traveled to, the language that everybody speaks and understands. So we haven't lost sight of the fact that it's hate that brought us to work with sports, and that there must be ways of finding ways to speak to that hate. We've been working on the codes of conduct, the guidelines that are put together by these sports teams. We are now working on messaging in terms of what kind of messaging we need to put out, what kind of messaging speaks to the whole world, how contextual do we get, how granular do we get. We are speaking about all those kind of things. So the last thing I'd like to say is, for many years, even before I joined the UN, I've been working in conflict hotspots. I've worked as a mediator of armed conflict for many years. And one of the things that we know for sure is that the ways in which people who radicalize use to reach those they radicalize are also very efficient when they are used by those of us who are trying to do the opposite. So if in Kenya, where I come from, where I was born, we used to use the cell phone because they were using the cell phone to mobilize, so then we were using the cell phone to demobilize, using the exact same methods that they were using, but using it in a different way. And so often I keep asking people, since all these extremists are so connected, as we've heard from the presentations that were here earlier today, why can't we be as connected? Why can't we become that force? Why can't we have them putting up maps of the world showing us what we are doing combined together against them? Because we do have that capacity to do that. We do have that capacity to work on the kind of messages that they're putting out, to provide information, counter information to what's being put out. So ladies and gentlemen, the game plan. Thank you.
Morning everyone, my name is Rishi, Jain. I'm Director of Impact at Liverpool Football Club. I suppose to try and follow on from Alice and the incredible way that she tells that story, our involvement as a football club came about through an introduction from the Red Sox. And for those who don't know, we all fall under the same ownership group, and that was a very quick but a very powerful conversation that I had with Dave Friedman, where he said to me, Rishi, talk to me about what LFC are doing around eradicating hate speech, hate crime, because we're part of this incredible program. And then it rolled on, and we had this inspiring moment at Alice's invitation at the UN where the game plan was launched. And for us as a football club and me as an individual, that really brought to life the global nature of what we were trying to achieve. A day later, which I realised in hindsight probably wasn't the kindest thing to do, I ring Laura and I said to Laura and Michelle, let's do something in Liverpool. We've had this moment, it's great, but it's one moment, let's make it bigger, let's make it better. And I suppose, how do you make things bigger and better than the United Nations? But I'd like to think we've sort of done that. So after many conversations, and there were many conversations because straight away the conversation was like, yes, let's just make this happen. We fast forward to April of this year, where we brought together over 100 delegates from UK sports, football, Formula 1, Formula E, horse racing, rugby, the governing bodies, the players' unions, etc. US sports, we had NASCAR, NFL, the Pittsburgh Penguins were represented, the Red Sox were represented, MLB were there, and actually we had the first multidiscipline, multi-sport summit solely focused on eradicating hate speech through the power of sports at Anfield. Special advisor, we were honoured to have her with us, Raymond Whitfield was with us, and actually for that room, which was a room of people who were committed to this cause and committed to diversity, equity and inclusion, it was the first time they'd heard about, especially the UK-based organisations, it was the first time they'd really heard about the impact of hate speech at its very worst. I suppose I'm not sure lucky is the right word, but in the UK, we don't suffer from the same consequences that you see in the US for many different reasons, and I do count myself very lucky in that sense. But actually, to hear those personal testimonies, to hear about the stories of Michelle, which Laura shared on their behalf, and Raymond with his powerful words, actually brought to life for that room why we do what we do. And for the first time ever, you actually saw real cross-collaborative working with those organisations committed to something that was bigger than all of us. You can imagine I work for I work for the biggest football club in the world. I'm going to say that on stage. And I'll stand by that as well if anyone wants to argue that with me. But it's true, you work for the biggest football club in the world, one of the biggest brands, and sometimes you can be guilty of saying, oh, we know best, and that's absolutely not the case. So to be in a room full of like-minded people, under the special advisor's guidance, with Laura's expertise with the Jones Day team, which actually stemmed from this summit, was incredible. And from that, we've now seen this huge appetite in the UK and across Europe to truly make the game plan global. And that was where we had, taken it back to that initial conversation that we had after the UN, that was a conversation that Laura and I had, is like, this is great, it's incredible, what a moment, what an initiative, it's been signed off, but let's truly make it global now, so let's take it across the Atlantic. And we really feel we've been able to do that. What I'm not doing, and hopefully it doesn't sound like this, I'm not sat on this stage, patting myself on the back and saying, right, we've achieved it. Far from it, it's very much how do we then start to influence our European counterparts, how do we take it further, how do we actually, at some point, and this is exactly where we want to get to, demonstrate how the power of sports can really influence these young men, these young women, these individuals engage in these behaviours, and actually prevent them from doing some of the most unimaginable things that unfortunately have taken place and unfortunately have happened to some people in this room. And that's where we're at, essentially. That's the next step in the journey. We very much want to see the game plan. Being here today is very powerful, but really want to see the game plan as the key to being that global action, that global movement where we see the sports sector across the world really take on its responsibilities. We had a fantastic work group meeting yesterday where we spoke about how we're going to communicate that and how we're going to do that. And actually one of the key takeaways for me was, as the sports community, we have the opportunity to help people activate within their own communities, within their own doorsteps. Like, I work for Liverpool Football Club, we've got this global reach. That's fantastic, and that comes with a huge responsibility as well. But actually, you've got people who are activating through the sports sector within their local communities on a global scale, nationally, internationally, whatever you want to call it, but have its key target audience who are super engaged in what they do through the power of sports. If we can work with them through the game plan, through individuals like yourselves and the influence that you all have to actually make a difference within those communities, I truly believe that we will make the world a better place. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Matthew Berger with the Foundation to Combat Antisemitism. The foundation was founded in 2019 by Robert Kraft, the owner of the New England Patriots, specifically focused on finding innovative ways to raise awareness about anti-Semitism. Our research has found that more than half of Americans do not believe that anti-Semitism is a problem in our society today. And more than half of Americans believe that if anti-Semitism is an issue, that the Jewish community themselves can solve it. We also know that the Jewish population in the United States is just 2.4% of the US population. So the Jewish community is not large enough to be able to address this issue itself. We need the support of all Americans. And galvanizing all Americans to understand what anti-Semitism is and feel empowered to take action is the work of our foundation. Last spring, we launched Stand Up to Jewish Hate, a $25 million advertising campaign specifically focused on raising awareness of anti-Semitism for those outside the Jewish community. Our campaign was featured with commercials during The Voice, The Today Show, Watch What Happens Live with Andy Cohen, and other popular television shows, showing Americans what anti-Semitism looks like in 2023, but also teaching that the way to address anti-Semitism is the same way that you address racism, gender inequality, and hate towards any other group. We want to showcase to the American public that anti-Semitism is like other hate, that the Jewish community is like other communities in this country, and that we can work together to address these issues together and fight all hate by standing up against anti-Semitism. As part of this campaign, we debuted the blue square, a symbol, a blue square emoji that exists on people's phones and devices that we want to be the universal symbol for addressing anti-Semitism. We see this as akin to the rainbow flag for the LGBTQ community. Anytime you see a rainbow flag, you know that that company or social media account or storefront cares about the rights of the LGBTQ community and is making an outward stance that they're there to support the community. We want the blue square to be the same symbol for the Jewish community and for the fight against anti-Semitism. And so we're encouraging people across the country to post and share the blue square as a way of raising awareness and starting conversations about what anti-Semitism is in our country today. Now, leveraging the work and the relationships that we've developed with the Sports Working Group, and in partnership with the White House and its national strategy to combat anti-Semitism, in 2 weeks, we're going to be launching a national sports convening on anti-Semitism, bringing leagues, teams, and other people in the sports community together to specifically talk about anti-Semitism as part of the broader conversation that's happening in the sports world about hate. We want to teach many of the leagues and teams for the first time what anti-Semitism looks like today, to help them hear from Jewish athletes and people in the community about what anti-Semitism looks like for them in the sports world, and to showcase best practices of how anti-Semitism and hate against the Jewish community can be incorporated into many of the great work that's being done in sports to address hate. Our goal is to raise the number of Americans that see anti-Semitism as a problem, recognize it in their communities, and are empowered to speak out against it when they see it. To that end, we're encouraging everyone to be part of the Stand Up to Jewish Hate community, to wear the blue square pin, to post and share the blue square, and we are very fortunate that Laura and the team at the Eradicate Hate Summit have agreed to pass out blue square pins today, and we encourage you to grab one at the front table. We want everyone to be part of the message of Stand Up to Jewish Hate and to really leverage the work that the sports community has and the influence that the sports community has to share with all people that we all have a role to play in ending anti-Semitism. Thank you.
Just for the record, I want everybody to know that the special advisor does know who the Steelers are now. So thank you very much. We're going to switch panels up.